Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times, a Prancing Pony podcast production. I'm the Man of the West, and after spending those 40 weeks that we did in Third Age Thursdays doing the deep dives into the poetry and songs from the Lord of the Rings, we moved on to something else this series as we looked at Middle-earth artifacts of the Third Age. Now, we began with Glamdring and Orcrist, moved on to Stang, and spent last week looking at the Arkenstone. But it's time to put the Hobbit down and pick up the Lord of the Rings as we look at another ancient sword and its rebirth, along with a ring whose history goes back to Valinor itself. Narsil, the sword that cut the ring off Sauron's finger at the end of the Second Age, might be the most widely known sword in Middle-earth, but we don't know a lot about its origin. We first hear about it at the Council of Elrond, where Elrond tells part of the tale. I was the herald of Gil-galad and marched with his host. I was at the battle of Dagorlad before the Black Gate of Mordor, where we had the mastery. For the spear of Gil-galad and the sword of Elendil, Aeglos, and Narsil, none could withstand. I beheld the last combat on the slopes of Orodruin, where Gil-galad died, and Elendil fell, and Narsil broke beneath him. But Sauron himself was overthrown, and Isildur cut the ring from his hand with the hilt shard of his father's sword and took it for his own. Now, after Boromir expresses wonder at what came of the ring, Elrond explains further, only to the north did these tidings come, and only to a few. Small wonder is it that you have not heard them, Boromir. From the ruin of the Gladden Fields, where Isildur perished, 3 men only came ever back over the mountains after long wandering. One of these was Oktar, the esquire of Isildur, who bore the shards of the sword of Elendil, and he brought them to Valandil, the heir of Isildur, who, being but a child, had remained here in Rivendell. But Narsil was broken, and its light extinguished, and it has not yet been forged again. Let's do a little flashback to that moment. I'm going to read from the Disaster of the Gladden Fields in Unfinished Tales. The orcs were now drawing near. Isildur turned to his esquire. Oktar, he said, I give this now into your keeping. And he delivered to him the great sheath and the shards of Narsil, Elendil's sword. Save it from capture by all means that you can find, and at all costs, even at the cost of being held a coward who deserted me. Take your companion with you and flee. Go, I command you. Then Oktar knelt and kissed his hand, and the 2 young men fled down into the dark valley. And later we learned that Oktar and his companion escaped, bearing with them the shards of Narsil. Well, what then? After Aragorn told Boromir that the sword would be reforged and returned to Gondor, well, it was. The sword of Elendil was forged anew by elvish smiths, and on its blade was traced a device of 7 stars set between the crescent moon and the rayed sun, and about them was written many runes, for Aragorn, son of Arathorn, was going to war upon the marches of Mordor. Very bright was that sword when it was made whole again. The light of the sun shone redly in it, and the light of the moon shone cold, and its edge was hard and keen. And Aragorn gave it a new name, and called it Andúril, Flame of the West. But what of its history? Do we know anything about its origins before Elendil? The closest we get is when Aragorn is required to put Andúril aside before entering Theoden's hall of Meduseld. There we read, Slowly Aragorn unbuckled his belt, and himself set his sword upright against the wall. Here I set it, he said, but I command you not to touch it, nor to permit any other to lay hand on it. In this elvish sheath dwells the blade that was broken and has been made again. Telchar first wrought it in the deeps of time. Death shall come to any man that draws Elendil's sword, save Elendil's heir. And that's really all we get, forged by Telchar in the deeps of time. Telchar was a dwarf of Nogrod in the Blue Mountains in the First Age. He crafted Angrist, the knife that Beren used to free a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown, as well as the dragon helm of Dorloman. That helm was crafted shortly after Glaurung first came forth from Angband in First Age 260. Now, we have no idea when in the First Age Angrist was crafted. It was Curufin's long before it was used by Beren in Angband. We also don't know when Telchar died, so we cannot precisely pin down the age of Narsil. But it is indeed old, and almost certainly First Age old. Although Telchar could have escaped the Blue Mountains at the end of the First Age and crafted Narsil early in the Second, that seems unlikely. Now, we know nothing more about this sword until near the end of the Second Age, when it is wielded by Elendil. No knowledge of how he obtained it or how long it had been in the line of the Lords of Andúril. Speaking of the Lords of Andúril, let's take a bit of time here to talk about one other of the heirlooms of the faithful, the Ring of Barahir. It was created in Valinor by the Noldor in the Years of the Trees, and it belonged to Finrod Felagund, who took it with him into exile and wore it in Nargothrond. That means this ring is at least 7,000 years old by the time Aragorn comes into possession of it. When Barahir saved his life at the Dagor Bragalach, Finrod gave the ring to him as a token of friendship between Finrod and the House of Barahir, and Barahir wore it for the rest of his life. When he died, his hand, still wearing the ring, had been taken by an orc leader. Beren avenged his father and retrieved the hand, taking the ring and burying the hand with his father. Beren showed the ring to Thingol as an indication of his friendship with the elves. He then used it to keep himself safe when entering Finrod's realm. Finrod honored his oath and ended up giving his life to save Beren. Now, eventually, through Dior, the son of Beren and Luthien, his daughter Elwing, and her son Elros, the Ring of Barahir made it to Númenor, where it became an heirloom of the kings. Beren showed the ring to Thingol as an indication of his friendship with the elves, and then used it to keep him safe when entering Finrod's realm. Finrod honored his oath and ended up giving his life to save Beren. Eventually, through Dior, the son of Beren and Luthien, his daughter Elwing, and her son Elros, the Ring of Barahir made it to Númenor, where it became an heirloom of the kings, until Tar Elendil gave it not to his son, Tar Meneldur, but to his daughter Silmarion, the firstborn, who was not able to succeed him. Now she in turn gave it to her son Valandil, who was the first Lord of Andúril, and it stayed in the line of the Lords of Andúril all the way to Elendil, who took it with him when the faithful escaped the downfall of Númenor. It then went to each of the kings of Arnor and then the kings of Arthedain, until Arvedui gives it to the inhabitants of Forochel as thanks for taking care of him and his men before he died in Third Age 1975. At some point after that, it gets ransomed by the Rangers and is then kept at Rivendell, where it remains until Elrond gives it to Aragorn. Aragorn then gave the ring to Arwen as a token of their betrothal, and that's the last we hear of it. Presumably, she either took it with her to her grave at Cedern Amroth, or, more likely, gave it to her son Eldarion, and it remained an heirloom of the reunited kingdom. And that's it for Narsil, Andúril, and the Ring of Barahir. We'll cover more heirlooms in the coming weeks as we look in depth at the Scepter of Annúminas and the Elendilmere. Folks, thank you for joining me for this Third Age Thursday, and be sure to come back tomorrow as we continue the story of Tuor and his coming to Gondolin on First Age Friday. Check out patreon.com/Tolkien Times to learn how you can support the show, join my content council, get a bonus episode every week, and more. Podcast listeners, please be sure to subscribe to the show in your apps. For those of you on YouTube, like the video, and please subscribe to this channel to get all of the PPP productions. And be sure you're following @PrancingPonyPod on all your social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.